Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. Going to do a Roxy Music video and a quick discussion of each album. Don't want to go into too much detail. Roxy Music formed in the early 1970s by such illustrious individuals as Brian Ferry, Brian Eno, Phil Manzanera, Paul Thompson, Andy McKay, and they very quickly established themselves as a kind of futurist, retro, rock and roll, strange, hybrid, electronica, high fashion, Dada-esque, weird kind of band. They looked like they'd arrived from outer space. They kind of, I think along with David Bowie really, they kind of pioneered the glam era, and much like Bowie they were very original. Their music contained very strange, abrasive textures and was a real mixture of stuff, you know. And I think they did to an extent reinvent themselves. They don't really quite get the kudos that David Bowie gets, I don't think. I think maybe because gradually as time went on they became more and more commercial and they started to, not bland out exactly, although they did kind of do that a bit, but they kind of became a bit less interesting as they went along. And they became much more of a commercial outfit. A little bit like Genesis and Phil Collins. Brian Ferry gradually became much more of the focal point of the band, and they kind of stopped being this strange, edgy art school kind of project and turned into more of a romantic pop band really. But they were incredibly influential. They were massively influential on punk. You know, the punks absolutely loved them, idolised them. I think it was because they had that blend of 50s rock and roll, which was very popular, you know, among the punks. Even though the punks had this ground zero approach, they were all, you know, their music was often rooted in 50s music, you know, stuff like Chuck Berry. But what Roxy Music also had was the fashion element, was the visual style, and they also had quite a few progressive tendencies, but without being prog rock. And they appealed massively to the working class people in England, strangely enough, in the UK. Even though they were quite a kind of, you know, flouncy band, they had a real following, you know, a kind of street following. And anyway, that was just a bit of background. So I'm going to whiz through these records, not going to take too long. We have the debut album, Roxy Music, released in 1972. It's got some fantastic stuff on it, and here we can see the original lineup, and there's Brian Eno. He left after 2 albums. I think he came to loggerheads with Brian Ferry. There was a bit of a tussle, I think, a creative tussle. You had Brian Eno, who was the non-musician of the band, making all these strange electronic noises on his keyboards. And then you had Brian Ferry, who was the main songwriter, and his identity in the band was already quite established. He had this kind of lounge lizard persona and this fantastic kind of croony vocal style. And his identity, I think, was so strong. Increasingly, as time went on, you know, his voice and his image came to characterise the band. And I think Brian Eno early on saw which way the wind was blowing really, and kind of he bailed out, I think, realising that he had to do his own thing. But I mean, certainly this is one of the great debut albums of all time. There's some stuff on side 2 which I'm not as keen on. It gets very strange and chilly and cold sounding. It's not really it's not a kind of warm, vibey album. You don't really put it on to kind of, you know, feel good. Well, I mean, maybe in places, but I mean, certainly on side 2, like I said, it gets a little bit disconcerting in a good way. I wouldn't like to say that disconcerting was bad. So this was 1972. The big song from this, of course, is Virginia Plain, one of their biggest songs. The cover was taken by Carl Stocker, and it featured Carrie Ann Muller, who went on to marry Chris Jagger, interestingly. So there we go, that's Roxy Music's debut album. This is the second album. This is For Your Pleasure. I just think it is an absolute feast of edgy, surreal, arty, hard-rocking stuff with some very strange kind of left-hand turns. The song that most people talk about on this record is In Every Dream Home a Heartache, which is a very strange song, all about this guy who's basically singing a song to his inflatable sex doll, and it comes wrapped up in all these strange alien sounding Brian Eno synths. It's just amazing. You've got Do the Strand, They always had fantastic opening songs on records, Roxy Music. Editions of You, Strictly Confidential, Beauty Queen. It's just a really strong set, and it's always a bit depressing when you realise that a band's best work was kind of so early on in their career. You know, ideally you kind of like to see bands improving over time. Most bands don't, and you know, Roxy Music were no exception. But the second album, just an absolute towering classic. This came out in 1973. It features Amanda Lear on the cover, who apparently was the muse of Salvador Dali. So yes, there you go. Okay, so yeah, I think if you were going to start anywhere with Roxy Music, you'd start with this record, and it's very muscular. It's just yeah, it's just a classic album. I can't see any fairer than that. With the third album, this is Stranded. This was the first record they made after Brian Eno left the band, although interestingly, Eno later said that this was actually his favourite album by them. So this album has got a fantastic lineup of tracks. Virtually every song is brilliant. Street Life, Just Like You, Amazona, which I think might be the first co-write. There's a kind of myth has developed over the years that as Roxy Music went along, they became increasingly Brian Ferry's band, as in he was writing all the songs, you know, but that's not actually the case. What happened was, when the band first started, it was just Brian Ferry writing all the material, and then gradually as the records went on, other songwriters crept in. So even though he became much more, you know, he became the focal point of the band, but the band actually became more collaborative as it went along. So the track Amazonia was co-written by Manzanera, and then on side 2 you have a wonderful run of songs. Serenade, A Song for Europe, Mother of Pearl, which is fantastic, and the final closing song is wonderful as well, Sunset. It's a great record. It's kind of its era. It still shows Roxy at the top of their game, really, wielding very strong melodic and commercial song ideas, but making it all quite strange and experimental sounding. You know, it's not a mainstream album by any stretch of the imagination. And yeah, this came out in November 1973. And on the cover we have Marilyn Cole, who was a former Playboy girl. Country Life, I think overall I enjoy this album more than Stranded. I think it's got a stronger set of songs overall. The Thrill of It All, which is just another great pop boiling opener. You've got All I Want Is You, Out of the Blue, a wonderful rock and roll kind of pastiche song, If It Takes All Night, which I absolutely love, and some really strong stuff on side 2. The final song on this album, Prairie Rose, I mean, that has the most incredible guitar solo from Phil Manzanera. It truly is one of the great all-time barnstorming rock guitar solos. It's, you know, it's psychedelic, it's bluesy, it's soulful, it's a bit proggy, it's inventive, it's just all over the place. It's just, you know, he really tears into his guitar. It's just a marvellous pouring forth, really, you know, of guitar inspiration. So this record came out in 1974. The singles were The Thrill of It All and All I Want Is You, and on the cover we have Constance Caroli, who apparently was the cousin of Michael Caroli from Cannes, and Evelyn Grundwald, who apparently had also had some kind of relationship with Michael Caroli from Cannes. So there we go. 1974, it was a gold album, and yeah, just one of the great pop rock albums of its era. Maybe a bit less experimental than Stranded, but still very far from being a kind of mainstream rock album. We have Jerry Hall. This was photographed on the island of Anglesey, apparently. This is the 5th Roxy Music album, and it is Siren. It's the final album of the original run of 5 studio albums by Roxy Music, and you could argue that maybe the formula is starting to wear a little bit thin. You get the feeling that perhaps they kind of maybe peaked a little bit on the previous couple of records, and this one is starting to repeat the formula. But it's still got some great stuff on it. The opening track, Love Is the Drug, is a real kind of churning rock song, you know, and I think that's what Roxy Music started to lose, really, after this record. They started to lose that sense of angst and that real kind of rough and tumble, meaty kind of sound, which was, I think it was because they had Paul Thompson on drums, who was one of the great kind of hard-hitting drummers of his era. Thompson went on to leave the band. I can't remember if it was the album after this or the one after, but they kind of, after they lost Paul Thompson, things became a lot less rocky. So this album was released in October of 1975, and it contains the hit single, as I said, Love Is The Drug, and also Both Ends Burning. We have the album Manifesto. This was the first record which Roxy Music made following their comeback. This one came out in 1979. It featured the songs Trash, Dance Away and Angel Eyes. This is a good album. It's kind of got a more disco sound, really. I mean, it came out in 1979, like I said. I mean, disco had been around for a fair while at this point. It's quite a kind of lightweight record, really. It's got some grooves on it. It's got some interesting sounds and interesting textures and some good rhythms, but it's not particularly adventurous on a songwriting front. There's not a great deal of depth there. The songs, if you put the songs on, you'll kind of have a good time. You'll dance around a little bit and you'll groove away to it, but it's possibly not, well, it's definitely not Roxy Music at their artistic zenith. Quite a good fun album though, and I do like the cover of this one. You have to kind of look twice really to make sure that they are all mannequins. I used to think that maybe there was one or two there which were not, but they are. This is Flesh and Blood, and this one is from 1980, and it contains the songs Over You, Oh Yeah, Same Old Scene, In the Midnight Hour. This is a very kind of lush production. This was the second album that Roxy made after they came back. This was the kind of real start of them becoming quite a kind of romantic sounding pop band with a fair amount of balladry creeping in, and it's not a bad record at all. It's got some good stuff on it. It's got a version of 8 Miles High on it by the Byrds, which is okay. This album cover was conceived by Peter Saville, who had done a lot of the work, or was going to do a lot of the work with Factory Records. It was photographed by Neil Kirk, and it features the models Amy Stevenson and Shelley Mann. The album Avalon, which was the final studio album to be released by Roxy. And this record really saw the band becoming an incredibly orally sophisticated unit. It contains, actually, it's a more experimental album than maybe it first appears. It shows Roxy Music definitely heading straight into the mainstream in a way. But there are some kind of synth textures and sounds on this which do hark back to their classic era. It's just that they're all kind of wrapped up in this kind of creamy, fondanty, soft, snowflakey kind of sound. The song on this record is More Than This, which features some wonderful guitar playing from Phil Manzanera, but I'm not quite sure about the album cover. That's never quite convinced me. This person here in the helmet is actually Lucy Helmore, who was Brian Ferry's girlfriend at the time, and again the cover was conceived, I think, and photographed by Peter Saville of Factory. Okay folks, hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave me some comments below on what you think of Roxy Music, and I'll be back soon. Have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.